A Far Cry 7 release date is almost undoubtedly in the works. It's one of Ubisoft's key franchises and a big seller. However, it's not a yearly series, which makes predicting when the next one will come out a little more challenging. As one of gaming's most identifiable and long-running franchises, Far Cry has been subject to both praise and disapproval. On one hand, the open-world, action-adventure series was once at the forefront of the genre, with the beloved Far Cry 3 serving as a prime example. On the other hand, more recent entries, such as Far Cry 6, have received criticism for derivative design choices, similar to past installments. Regardless, Far Cry isn't short on fans, and many of these fans might wonder when Ubisoft will release yet another entry into its tentpole anthology series. Far Cry has a staggering 14 different selections in its library, when factoring in both expansions and spin-offs. Outside of an upcoming Far Cry anime, not much is known about what the future of the IP holds. Given Far Cry 6 released back in 2021, the attention of some gamers has likely turned to when Far Cry 7 will appear and what direction it will take the overarching franchise in. As of right now, little information exists about the supposed 7th mainline game. Despite this, it might be possible to predict when it will finally hit the marketplace by evaluating previous release and development cycles. On average, there seems to be a 4-year gap between the launch of each mainline Far Cry title. Far Cry 2 came out in 2008, 4 years after the original game. In 2012, 4 years after its predecessor, Far Cry 3 was released. The debut of Far Cry 4, a game many consider the best in the series, came in 2014, only 2 years after the release of Far Cry 3, marking the quickest turnaround. The window between Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 5, released in 2018, returned the series to its traditional 4-year gap, while Far Cry 6 followed 3 years after that in 2021. Going by this pattern, fans of the Far Cry series will likely have to wait until 2025 before Ubisoft drops the next entry. In the best-case scenario, gamers might see another Far Cry title in 2024, but given the new technology developers now have at their disposal, especially a big-budget company like Ubisoft, it's fair to presume that studios will take their time to explore these next-gen capabilities. With no actual information regarding Far Cry 7 to go on, players shouldn't expect a quick turnaround between it and Far Cry 6. This timeline, however, would not apply to any expansion or spin-off that Ubisoft may decide to push in the interim. There's no official release date for Far Cry 7 currently. Far Cry 6 was just released a few months ago, so we can assume that work on the next game is in its preliminary stages. If the series' development pattern continues, we'll likely see a spin-off game reusing assets from Far Cry 6 in either 2022 or 2023, and then Far Cry 7 in 2024 to 2025. However, Ubisoft has stated that it plans to develop more free-to-play titles using its biggest franchises, so Far Cry 7 might not be the single-player percussion we're used to playing. Instead, it might be a battle royale, an arena shooter, or whatever else is popular at the time. The Far Cry series is pretty creatively bankrupt at this point, so Ubisoft could just call any game Far Cry 7. The only thing that links the series is that players take the role of a plucky underdog, facing off against a cartoonish villain in a sandbox open world. Maybe next time, players can have a shark riding on top of an racing car as one of their companions. Those looking to get another fix of Far Cry have a bit of a wait. Far Cry 7 will likely be a current-gen only game if it comes out in 2024 to 2025. However, the inevitable spin-off game that will release before that might be a cross-gen title. If console supply issues continue to persist, that will likely be the case. There is no official word out for the release of Far Cry 7. The last version was released only a few months ago, and it is not a game that comes out annually. It has a pattern of following up with a spin-off game and then the next iteration. Judging by the previous patterns, we can expect a Far Cry 6 spin-off game by the end of 2023, and then Far Cry 7 coming to the masses sometime in 2024 or 2025. This is nothing concrete though. We only speculate an expected release date based on Ubisoft's usual Far Cry release cycle. There might be a significant change around the corner for Far Cry 7. Ubisoft recently announced plans to develop more free-to-play titles, hinting towards a multiplayer online title. So Far Cry 7 might not be a single-player production that we are used to playing. It could be something else entirely. If that becomes a reality, Ubisoft will lose some fans of the series, as most people enjoy it as a single-player production, and most of them don't want it going multiplayer suddenly. Ubisoft's first-person open-world series Far Cry has had an uncharacteristically quiet year. But this should really benefit the next installment. When it comes to building huge, open-world sandboxes, developer Ubisoft has a vast amount of experience. The Assassin's Creed franchise seems to get bigger in size and scope with each installment, and some of its other IPs, like Watch Dogs, have followed a similar blueprint. Far Cry, a first-person open-world series, has not strayed far from this formula either, a fact that has enabled the series to churn out new games almost yearly over the last decade. Far Cry 6 arrived in 2021, with its development and subsequent launch having been heavily impacted by the global COVID pandemic, and this seems to have had a knock-on effect on the franchise, as no new game has been announced yet. The silence surrounding a potential Far Cry 7 is interesting. The gap between Far Cry 6's announcement and release was approximately 18 months. So it's a safe bet to assume the absolute earliest gamers will get their hands on the next installment of the series would be summer 2024, and that's if the game's announcement is made imminently. Ubisoft should seize this opportunity with both hands and use this time to really bring the wow factor back to a franchise that seems to have lost its spark recently. Releasing games almost yearly is a double-edged sword. On one hand, fans of the series get to experience a new release regularly. On the other, small windows between releases mean little time to innovate, and this results in several iterations having little more than minor visual upgrades and subtle gameplay changes, rather than the big sweeping changes fans have come to expect from new releases in their favorite franchises. Far Cry has unfortunately fallen into the latter category, with each new game copying the same standard mechanics as its predecessor, and signs of real innovation becoming relatively scarce. Far Cry 7 has the opportunity to change this. The series has a number of ways it can reinvigorate itself. Firstly, Far Cry 7 needs to ensure it focuses on its villain, starting with the maniacal Vaz from Far Cry 3. The series built a reputation for its eccentric, imposing cast of villains. The addition of the talented Giancarlo Esposito as Far Cry 6's main antagonist was an incredibly exciting one for fans, but ultimately, while his own performance was stellar as usual, the character's lack of screen time damaged his overall impact on the story, and he failed to live up to the heights of some of his predecessors. Far Cry's open-world formula also needs a huge shakeup. The tried-and-tested gameplay loop of moving to each area of the game world, clearing out enemy bases, uncovering more of the map, and unlocking missions, has become stale and borderline tedious at times, which is hardly surprising, considering the franchise has stuck to this formula fairly rigidly for 10 years now. Gamers expect more from their open-world games now, and titles such as Elden Ring and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild have only solidified these expectations. Ubisoft has time on its side this time, and it needs to use it wisely. Far Cry fans would surely be happy to wait longer for the next installment, providing this wait is rewarded with a title that breathes new life into the franchise, in the same way that the fan-favorite Far Cry 3 did back when it was released in 2012. If Far Cry 7 spotlights its main antagonist better and creates a new, fresh gameplay loop that rewards exploration without reverting to the stale formula fans are used to, the series' waning popularity should once again rise drastically.